in the rising hill country, a new town, a town that hadn't been around. Well, it was founded about 25 years earlier when they pushed railroads down through the Tennessee Valley, and it was opened with Yankee money. That was called part of the New South. And they'd opened some coal mines, they'd opened a blast furnace, they'd opened it to strawberry production because they had now had trains that could carry strawberries up north without them spoiling. And there was an influx of Scottish immigrants to work in the mills there. So it wasn't your classic Old South. It was New South that was caught up in the turmoil of the change of times. But then, by 1925, after a boom at the turn of the century when it was founded, it was caught in an economic recession. The big blast furnace had closed down. The population had declined in half, and so it was a town in economic turmoil.
Okay, today, if you want to get to we'll get to that in a second. When we get to Dayton, Tennessee, how do you get there?
Well,
have you been there?
Oh yes. In fact, I'm going up again this weekend. I did there because, to me, setting the stage was important because the town had a lot to do with how the trial came out and the feelings of the trial, and the town hasn't changed at all. And so I would go up there to sort of get a feel for the layout and how it looks. And the way you get there is you basically go to, depends on whether you're coming from north or south. If you're coming from the south, you go to Chattanooga. And if you're going from the north, you go to Knoxville, and then you take the old road. Now there's a big superhighway that's on the other side of the river, the Tennessee River, which is all dammed up and makes it sort of like a lake. So you have to take the old road, which goes to the west, and so you either go down from Chattanooga for about 40 minutes now, or down from Knoxville for about 40 minutes, or up from Chattanooga for about 30. And you get to this little town.
The second dedication in your book is to William H. Ellis, Jr., a Bryan-esque attorney politician. So the first one was to your father, who was a Darrow-like criminal lawyer, and then William H. Ellis, Jr., a Bryan-esque attorney politician. What's that all about?
Well, William Ellis, or Skeeter Ellis as he was known, had died shortly while I was working on the book. And he was an attorney I got to know in Seattle, Washington, which is where I practiced law. And he was a populist person, politician, state legislator, my state legislator in Washington State. And he had that same effervescent personality, interested in all things, as Bryan was interested in all things.
Which one of these is Bryan?
Oh, Bryan is right in the middle with the bow tie, looking out, sort of grinning, with his coat off.
Who's on his left or our right?
Who's on his? I got to get my
Clarence
directions right. Clarence Darrow is way over on the side, and he's shaking. He's over on the far side. You see just half of his head looking over. He's facing toward Bryan, but he's shaking hands with the judge. That's the Judge Ralston. And then the other way, right in front of the WGN microphone, is Dudley Field Malone, who's looking out toward us in the suit. He was the very dapper and very eloquent co-defense lawyer, along with Clarence Darrow, and then sort of hidden next to him between Malone and Bryan, you see sort of the half a face of Tom Stewart, who was the prosecutor for East Tennessee, a brilliant lawyer. He became senator and served several terms as senator from the state of Tennessee, and he was the lead prosecutor. Bryan was his assistant, or basically his mouthpiece.
You mentioned earlier in the dedication, your father is not alive. When did he die?
He died in, I think it was 91.
And you also mentioned that your mother was alive when you got the Pulitzer. Does that mean she died since then?
No, she was alive when I was invited up to go give the talk where I heard about the Pulitzer. She died just a few months ago.
On the cover of this book of yours is a photograph of a monkey. Why?
Well, many people say it's a good likeness of me with the way the name is associated with it. It's known as the Monkey Trial. And that was all credit for that cover, which I think is a beautiful cover, goes to Basic Book. They came up with the design when they called me up and said, "Oh, we've got a wonderful design. It looks like a Knopf cover," which I guess to them was the highest compliment. But it is sort of fun. It's known as the Monkey Trial because what was being challenged was the idea: the way it was pictured in the press is, did humans evolve from monkeys? And of course, there were wonderful cartoons during the trial, such as cartoons where when the verdict was announced and Scopes was convicted, you see all these monkeys in a tree jumping up and down saying, "Hooray, we're not related to William Jennings Bryan." that sort of reversal. So it's how the trial was known.
You mentioned Scopes, John T. Scopes, 24 years old.
Yep.
Who was he?
John Scopes was a new teacher in Dayton. That's him on the far side, right, walking with his red hair.
On the left side?
Yes, the furthest away from the sign, on the outside.
And it says, read your Bible up there on the sign.
That's one of the posters that was hung by one of the sides around in town. There were 4 such posters around in Dayton. And going over toward the Read Your Bible is the original defense attorney, Neal, who is from
John Neal.
John Neal, who was who had been a law professor at the University of Tennessee, and then full over is George Raplia, who invented the trial. He was the local manager of the coal mine who'd come down from New York City and read the offer about the ACLU to challenge the new Tennessee anti-evolution law. The ACLU had been dogging the efforts to pass laws against the teaching of human evolution in public schools. That had been Bryan's crusade. He'd come close in several states, and wherever he was trying, the ACLU would appear to try to stop the legislation. The first success after a 2-year-long crusade came in Tennessee. The law passed. Raplia, this Yankee who was down there running the coal mines in Dayton, East Tennessee, Republican East Tennessee, he was opposed to the law, of course, and saw this offer in the local paper for the ACLU to represent any local teacher who was willing to challenge the law. Well, he thought that was a great opportunity to strike at the law, and so he went down and he tried to think, how can I get the town to go along with me? And how he could was the idea of publicity, bring publicity to the town. Remember, the town is in economic decline, and it's in Republican East Tennessee, so it's not in Bryan country. The county where Dayton is had never voted for William Jennings Bryan in any of his 3 campaigns for president. It had always gone for the Republican, McKinley or Taft. And so he went down and tried to convince the local townspeople. He went to see the school superintendent of the public schools, and the president of the school board. And he convinced them that this would be a great way to put Dayton on the map, to bring this trial down, because this would certainly be a media sensation. And here the ACLU was willing to defend any teacher willing to challenge. So they tried to figure what teacher could they get. And the biology teacher is also the school principal, and he had a family, and he was a middle-aged man, and they thought, oh, well, the controversy just wouldn't be appropriate. So they struck upon the idea of having John Scopes. Now, the problem was he'd never taught biology, so he'd never violated the law. He was a general science teacher. He was also the football coach. But the idea was a test case, so it didn't matter that much. And so they sent somebody out to get him. He was out playing tennis at the time, and they brought him down to the local drugstore, it was during Prohibition, so that was where people hung out, at the local drugstore, which was owned by the president of the school board, Fred Robinson's drugstore. And they brought Scopes down, and they presented the option that here, remember, this is his boss asking. It isn't the scene from Inherit the Wind where they pull him out of where a mob led by a fire-breathing fundamentalist minister drags him out of the courtroom, drags him out of his classroom. No, here he is, it was this summer, brought in from a tennis game, and here's his principal, school superintendent and the president of the school board, and George Raplia, the manager of the coal mine, plus a couple other figures, the city solicitor, Sue Hicks, and his brother, Herbert Hicks. And they
Sue's a man, by the way, right?
Sue, yes, the person who A Boy Named Sue is written for. The song A Boy Named Sue is written about him. He was a friend of Johnny Cash later on. So they ask him, they say, would you be willing to stand for a test case? And he was young, he had no particular plans to stay in town, he was up for an adventure, and he had gone to college in University of Kentucky.